Welcome to the Productivity Show, a podcast where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tam. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency, where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm joined by a very special guest. His name is Bert Massey. He is a strength and conditioning coach here in Austin, Texas. There's also New Fit certified, and that specializes in biomechanics and athletic performance. In fact, he is my strength and conditioning coach for the past 3 years now. So I'm really excited to have you on the show today. Bert, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm really excited to be here. We've had a lot of conversations about having me on here, so I'm pretty excited about it, man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I want to immediately dive in here. So what is your philosophy around exercise and fitness?
I think my philosophy in exercise and fitness can be defined two ways. One, taking off a bite at a time, a bite that you can chew. So I see too many people that start into fitness and it's like, we're going to go all the way in. I'm working out 5 days a week. I'm changing my diet. I'm going to bed at 9 every night. And that lasts for a week. So my philosophy as a trainer and as training myself is give the person bites that they can handle. Take bites that you can handle. Don't try to work out 5 days a week. Maybe get one workout a week. And then the other part of that philosophy is emphasizing how important gait, walking, and rotation are in the development of the human body, because I think oftentimes that gets missed in our traditional Western view of what is weightlifting, what is strength and conditioning, getting stronger.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure we're going to unpack all of that stuff here today. Sure. So we started working together about 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years now. And I came to you because I had a shoulder surgery. I haven't talked too much about that on the podcast, but yeah, I had a shoulder surgery on my right shoulder. I had a labrum tear, and we had Garrett on the show a few years back, and
awesome.
I did most of my rehabbing through him, working with the New Fit device, which I'm sure we'll get into as well. But then obviously after doing some PT work, I want to get back into the gym and working out, and I said, you know what, I need to work with somebody.
Right.
And so through talking to different people, also the fact that you're 2 blocks from where I live, made a very easy choice to say, okay, this is a great guy. He knows what he's up to. Everyone recommends him. I'm going to work with this guy.
Cool.
So talk to me about, even if you remember, what it was like when we first started working together. And is it a common thing that you see people come to you like with shoulder problems or surgeries?
Absolutely.
Or
I think the most common and successful client that I have come to me in our business, the way we run it, is the injured person who has a limitation, be it a shoulder, be it a back, be it a knee, or some sort of pain, because at that point they show up with an open mind and they're really looking for a solution. And then it's great because I get to step in and guide them toward that solution. I mean, there's no magic pill, and I don't want to say that I fixed your shoulder right away, because I definitely didn't. And that takes 2 years, and that's work on your own. 2 years relatively for you, not for any shoulder. I'm just referencing our training. And I think that's probably the most common person that comes, and that's probably the most common approach that we get, because it goes back to that whole philosophy thing about taking bites that the person is prepared to chew. So oftentimes people that don't have injuries, they come in and they're trying to prove to me how strong they are. And little do they know that I don't care. Like, I want you to be stronger than where you are when you got there. But as far as impressing me with a great deal of strength, somebody's good at bench press and they come in and they want to do bench press and they want to show me how strong their upper body is with bench press. Sometimes they get frustrated. We don't really do conventional bench press in there. And I might give the person an exercise that I think is maybe a substitute for a press, but is way harder for them and uses a lot less weight. That person is not ready to take that step, because they're caught up in what you would probably call their ego, and that they're building their ego with the weight room. And somebody like you that came in that was hurt, and one, you had a great attitude about it anyways, because you were ready to take those little bites and figure it out as we go. And that's probably the best thing and the most common person that comes to me and has a great deal of success. Again, because they're ready to take the information on. And it's not like I'm dumping too much information on them at one time, really trying to change. And this is early in my career. I felt like I was trying to always change people's ideas of fitness when they came into the gym. And that is not a good formula for picking up clients. You got to meet people where they are, man.
So do you remember, aside from obviously a bum shoulder, was there anything else you noticed right away about me?
This man does not carry a lot of tension in his body. This guy is very relaxed. And that's a great thing for your mindset. It's probably why you've been as successful and low stress and low key of a dude as you are. But I could tell when I met you that grit of I'm going to lock this down and push something with every ounce of my fiber. That was something that you did not really understand how to do. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand how to do. And that's something we were talking about before that we'll get into further. But I would say that's the biggest thing I noticed about you is there wasn't... And some people carry too much tension. I had a great guy say one time, one of my guys I learned a whole lot from in the strength and conditioning world, he said there's a relative level of rigidity and chaos. The rigidity is a very stiff-necked, very stiff person who can't turn very well. You need to introduce some chaos into that rigidity. Tan was all chaos and flopping all over the place without a lot of rigidity. So when I first met you, I knew the first thing we had to do was introduce a whole lot of rigidity into your body or teaching you how to control the tension in your own body, which is a much longer thing. But part of the reason that shoulder got hurt, when we've talked about this in the hip hop class, which is kind of funny.
Just expand on that, which I don't think I've shared this before, but the way this shoulder got injured was here in Austin. There's this place, Ballet Austin, where you can take classes.
Right.
And I took a hip hop class and I was dancing to Rihanna work, I think it was called. And I just did a twist and turn with my right shoulder and I just popped out.
Yeah.
And I always knew I had a weak shoulder because it has dislocated before where it came back in, which
right.
I think is called subluxation, I think.
Subluxation.
Oh, yeah. So that happened a few times. So I'm like, okay, this is obviously not a good thing.
So one of the reasons that could happen to someone, and in your case, like I said, you needed more rigidity, more tension in your body, is because if I have a stronger core and a more rigid body, that shoulder knows, oh, my body's hanging on to me. Like I can go ahead and fling this arm way out here, like I'm sure that you were popping and locking, and you went to that pop, and when you went to that pop and threw that shoulder out, the shoulder didn't have anything holding it into your body. So then it just went and came out of the socket and was way too loose. And that is literally the definition of subluxation. Like it drops, the tension in the joint relaxes a whole lot, and then it's just very easy to pull out from there.
So when you say tension, is that a function of strength or is that a function of something else? Like how do you hold tension in that sense?
Yeah, it's a function of strength. Two of the examples I use a lot of are, the more complicated one is a tensegrity model. If anyone knows what a tensegrity model is, it's rubber bands and dowels, and it makes a circle or some sort of structure that the strength of the structure is in itself. There is no outside forces holding this structure together. It is the internal parts of that structure that hold it together. That's what a human body is, but a better example is a Chinese finger trap. If you take your two fingers in a Chinese finger trap and you pull them apart, the tension is increased in the Chinese finger trap. You're never getting your fingers out. Kind of the same thing with the body. If you pull on one side of the body, say your arm, and it doesn't increase tension on the other side to hold that arm into the body, we end up with a dislocated or subluxed shoulder because there isn't the opposing side, that the opposite side that we're pulling from, holding the shoulder in place. And one of the keys to motion is that you keep some level of tension. But again, back to that chaos and rigidity thing, someone can be far too rigid and absolutely stuck in, think of like powerlifter, strongman. They waddle and they turn with their whole body. And then you ask them to throw a baseball and it just looks really sad. It's that element of chaos and rigidity again. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the idea of, we joke about it sometimes when we're working out together. It's if you're so strong, you're so big, but you cannot even do basic movements.
Right.
Something is a little off.
You've now sacrificed a lot of range of motion, a lot of rotation, a lot of really important healthy things that make us uniquely human for more strength, or in this case, to keep the word that we're using, more tension. And indeed, a bodybuilder, something we talked about recently in the gym, was flexing. And I told you, I said, you actually would probably benefit from standing in front of your mirror and flexing, because flexing is creating tension. So a bodybuilder, if he stands in front of the mirror and goes through all of his poses and does his flexes, that's actually creating more tension in his body and getting his muscles stronger. So flexing can actually increase neurological tension, which is the force that makes a human stronger or recruit more mass, bring more cellular reproduction to the muscles themselves. This is that whole thing. And again, if you do that for so long, then the size of your muscles starts to impede putting your arms all the way down to the side or something like that. But if you want to live a normal life and ride bikes and run and do things like that, I would probably not suggest it.
So what have you seen now compared to where I started to where I'm now? What's the major difference that you've seen?
I think the biggest thing is understanding that mechanical tension through the core. That mechanical tension, that Chinese finger trap, does translate through the core. And your shoulder is a great example of this. When I know we're going to talk a little bit about body weight recommendations and what's a good standard for everyone to do, and the pull-up is it's a great standard. It's a hard standard. Like, a lot of people can't do a pull-up, and that's okay. You're not like in dire need of strength if you can't do a pull-up. But I would say if you can do a number of pull-ups, you're probably pretty strong, and that you could probably be okay. You wouldn't want to do pull-ups for forever, that whole balance thing. But the biggest thing that I've noticed now relates to the idea of your shoulder. When we would do hangs, your body and your nervous system would start to freak out, and you would get this nervous feeling like your shoulder's going to come off. And then we really started focusing on that, especially in probably the past year, because we had built some hip strength and we had built some core strength. And then we really started working on keeping that tension down in your abs so that your shoulder knows, oh, now I can stretch away. Now I can add this range of motion, and now we've actually got you doing pull-ups. And that's the thing I've noticed. You just understand the tension better. And then the side effect of that is pat on the back, you're developing a six-pack. Six-pack, in this case, is not a diet-induced thing where you had to lose fat. It's something where we had to create more core tension so that your body would know, oh, I can let that arm stretch away because now he has all this tension in his abs and in his rib cage and in his armpits and everything else. And so it's this balance. When you can put tension in different places, you now have more mobility in other places. And so your shoulder has more mobility because we're able to put more tension in other places. And then on top of that, just the seeking of knowledge that comes to that point. You're at the point now where you're asking me like really specific stuff about lifts, like ankles and feet and things like that. And when someone gets to that point, now they're starting their own pursuit. And I'm not so much a teacher anymore, which I love referring to training or strength and conditioning as teaching, because I really believe Pavel Satsulin said one time, don't treat your clients like clients. Clients receive a passive service. Treat your clients like students. And now your questions are like master's level questions because we've had enough time to work out. I'm looking at clubs and maces and kettlebells and wedges and all this stuff sitting in your living room. So you've started to add to it. And I would say that's the biggest thing, and that's when you really start to see the benefits, and you see somebody transform from a healthy person who is fit to a fit person. And that's a very different distinction in my mind. You can be healthy and you can be fit. You're in your right BMI, your body fat's a healthy percentage. You're not overweight, your clothes fit well. But then you see that other person and it's, oh, dang, those clothes sit in the right places and you can see muscles. And it's the old Dumb and Dumber thing. Like the guy walks by you and he goes, he must work out. I mean, you can see that. That's the change in appearance that I see. You look like a guy that works out, not like a businessman who is being skinny in shape, which is not out of shape, but you've just, understand what I'm saying? You've taken that next step to now you're a fit person.
So you were mentioning benchmarks earlier. I'm curious to hear from your point of view what some of those benchmarks are. For example, I remember I was dating this girl and she told me her goal was to be able to do one push-up, like not from her knees, but an actual push-up.
Sure.
And I was like, I thought everybody could do a push-up.
No way. Not a true blue one. Not like elbows tucked in, not snaking the body up. I think push-ups and pull-ups are a great benchmark. I think a push-up is a far more achievable benchmark than a pull-up. But a body weight squat where you can sit down, keep your feet flat on the ground, and sit there for a couple of minutes. That's a benchmark for mobility. I think that's a age and injuries notwithstanding, right? If I get a 70-year-old or 60-year-old client who's had 2 knee replacements, probably not going to get back her or him into a full depth squat. But someone 20, 30, 40, 50, relatively injury-free, benchmark for mobility, you need to be able to sit down into that deep squat. I need you to hit that full hip flexion and knee flexion, and that also shows like foot control, ankle mobility, those sorts of things. So that would be my benchmark for mobility. Also, being able to touch your toes without much effort. I think that's a benchmark, and I'm talking low-level stuff here. On a slightly scale above that, I would say push-up and pull-up. If you can do a push-up and pull-up, that's going to be really good. One of the benchmarks we used, if you are going to a conventional gym and using bench press, let's say, for example, being able to bench press your body weight was a really good benchmark. I don't love bench press, but I mean, we're talking general benchmarks here. And I think those are all pretty good. And I also think as a benchmark for the legs, because that's a little tougher, I think you should be able to jump as high as you can and then land and not have any bad repercussions off of that. I think that's a good benchmark for the legs, for the mobility wise, be able to sit down in a squat and then be able to jump and land on a hard surface and not have your knee hurt or your ankle hurt or anything like that. And a relatively decent jump, not jump off of like a 6-foot building or something, or 6-foot wall or something.
I'm actually very surprised because the deep squat is actually the thing I'm working on right now.
Yeah.
And I was actually very surprised I couldn't do it right away.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, what? My parents were always able to do this. In America, they call this an Asian squat. Everyone is able to squat down.
I have a client, I will not mention her name, but she says, quote, all Asians can do that. I do not agree. Maybe in countries that I have not visited, the numbers and percentages are way higher, but certainly I have trained many people that are Asian, and a lot of them couldn't squat. And we got them to the point where they could, and it is a cultural thing. But yeah, no, it's surprising.
Yeah, so I'm working on it every day now. So I have a kettlebell here, and then I'll do a deep squat, and I'll just hold on to it.
Yep.
As long as I can until I'm able to. And I've noticed my shin, my fids.
That's the one.
That's the one that's holding me back from
the
doing
shin.
it.
The shin and the ankle, man, that's the one that holds you back from that deep squat.
So if someone is a little bit more intermediate, advanced, what are some things you would say are good benchmarks for people? Like they're beyond the basic deep squat.
They're beyond that.
Like they can do a pull-up.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. I would say a benchmark for that, I think it would go to ranges of motion at that point. If you can do a push-up, you can do a pull-up, then I'm going to go to, okay, let's take your pull-up and let's tuck your knees up to your chest. Can you still do a pull-up? There's your probably next benchmark. And then next benchmark would be, can you hold 50% of your body weight in your hands in the form of a kettlebell or like a dumbbell and squat it then, and then come up out of the bottom of the squat? I think those are pretty good things. I also think in the squat world, you could move into a pistol squat. Can you do a single leg squat? But I'm going to stay in the body weight realm because I don't want to get into the meaningless numbers of specific exercises and how strong you are in a certain specific exercise, because then that gets to the point where strength will trick you, and then you get people that are shooting for weights that they can't do, and you're going to irritate something. And if I say pressing 50 pounds over your head, someone might twist and contort their body in a lot of weird ways to get that 50-pound pressed over their head. But like a one-arm push-up, you can't hide from that. That's if you can do that. And that would be, honestly, in both of those cases, both pistol squat and one-arm push-up, I would say you're further than intermediately strong. Because you're strong, you can do a push-up, you can do a pull-up, you've got this mobility, you can do a bodyweight squat. Lunges are no problem for you. Then you move into this world of more specialization in like harder calisthenics, which, by the way, if anyone wants a great body weight progression book, the
one with the jail guy?
Yeah, the prison one, where it's the fake story about the guy that's been in prison. I know you bought a copy of it.
I borrowed it, yeah.
Convict conditioning. It has the greatest body weight steps to how to build that one-arm push-up and how to build that pistol squat. And by the time you can do those, you're really strong. Weights in the midst of that assist that process. But I like the idea, if we're talking benchmarks, if you can do the first benchmark, let's go ahead and put that other benchmark for the pretty strong person to aim for. Let's put it pretty far out there so that they've got to build it in different ways. And you can build the pistol squat by like holding weights in front of you to counterbalance it, to keep that ankle from allowing you to have that range of motion.
So one thing I've always found fascinating is when I train with you, and when people ask me about it, I think the best way I can describe it is, one, it's like functional movements. Two, it's only 30 minutes, which is something that people are always very surprised by, which I actually really enjoy. And then three, I would say there's like a longevity aspect to it. So functional, 30 minutes, longevity. I think there's a lot to unpack there, but maybe the first question I would have for you there is, what's your take on people working out like 2 hours a day? Like when I go out work out with my brothers, like they're there for 2 hours. I'm like, bro, I'm done in 30 minutes.
This is a great point, because we've talked about bodybuilding, and your brother is a bit of a bodybuilder, and the bodybuilding design could work for everyone in the world. And I'm not getting into this larger muscles thing. I'm just talking about, here's the machine, you do the curls. Here's the machine, you do the delts. Here's this exercise, you do the rear delts. Here's this exercise for the middle delts. Here's this exercise for the triceps. Like, that works. There's no question. It works. But who has and who wants to put 2 to 3 hours per day working out every day? That's not something I want to do, and that's not something in the city of Austin. Those are not my clients, and I knew that. Those people are just making it more of a sport, I would say. If you're there for an hour, 2 hours, something like that, you're either doing one of two things. You're making this into a sport and you're being very specific on what you're doing, or you're hanging out and socializing the whole time, checking your phone or sitting at the station and not doing anything. What I think we do, and this kind of goes back to a little bit of the first question you asked me about philosophy. I probably should have said it then, but the way you phrased that question made me think of it. One of the largest influences that I have on my training and the training that we do every day is what is referred to often as turn of the century, and by that I mean like 1900s, like 1899 to 1900. Physical culture was a very studied subject in America. There were professors of physical culture. These people were highly educated, very well-respected people. And it wasn't just in America, but it got very popular in America. And early on in my career, I started reading this stuff. Specifically, my favorite one is written by a Russian man named George Hackenschmidt. And George Hackenschmidt, look up pictures of him. He is as ripped and shredded as any man in any movie. Like, the guy rivals Chris Hemsworth in the new Thor movie or Thor Love and Thunder. Like, the guy is absolutely massive. And he wrote a book in 1908. And the book is called The Way to Live in Health and Fitness. Some of the things he recommended: never work out for more than 20 minutes. Matter of fact, his recommendation was that you bathe, get out of the bathtub sopping wet, start working out nude in your yard. Fortunately, we can't do that. But by the time you're dry, you're done. You've done enough. He also had lots of stuff on not eating stabled animals, getting like 70% of your diet from your garden. The guy was way, way ahead of his time. But I think learning from those guys, and also the functional movement thing, those guys around that time, there were no barbells. There were no benches. There was no bench press. There was no squat. Matter of fact, when it started in weightlifting, there was only what is called the somehow anyhow. You had the somehow anyhow two-handed and the somehow anyhow one-handed. Somehow anyhow two-handed results in Olympic lifting, snatches, power cleans, things like that. Somehow anyhow one-handed turns into windmills, bent presses, bent, B-E-N-T, to distinguish that very much from the bench press, because it's a very different thing. And so I would think that philosophically the way we train is largely based on this very old school physical culture. I want you to be able to pick up a very oddly shaped rock off the ground and pick it up and throw it 5 feet. It's a big demand. That rock could weigh 40, 50 pounds. But with the way we train, I've put you and I put my clients in so many odd positions. And that's something that kind of goes back to that tension conversation. The goals of our sessions are to teach your body to create tension in any direction you want to create it, and then to be able to turn that off and on and toggle it for how much you need, depending on how much weight is in your hand. And so that is functional fitness to a definition, but it's also, I feel like functional fitness is one of those things that gets pigeonholed into different things. And that if I say functional fitness, people think, oh, he's doing like rotational holds and stuff, and that he doesn't actually pick up like really heavy stuff. And I think the best example of that is, no, I want you to pick up this really oddly shaped, super heavy object and stack it on top of these other objects and be able to place it down really softly, or toss it 5 feet in the other direction, whichever I tell you to do.
Yeah, I first witnessed this. I was just looking through my phone, and on your iPhone, it will show you like photos of a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at a photo from 3 years ago when my brothers came. They came into town. I've been working out with you.
Yeah, it's an old photo you posted for the podcast. I feel like we could have gotten a new one that's better. But
yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, so it's about 3 years old now, and I've been working out with you at that point for 7-8 months. Mm-hmm. And so just to give everybody a clue, like my two younger brothers, there's maybe about 8 or 9 year gap between me and them. And they're like really into fitness. Like they love working out. They work out like 4 or 5 times a week. Yeah. Everybody who would look at them would say, oh yeah, they're definitely working out. They're in good shape and everything. Have a 6-pack and all that. And so I remember when we did a workout together, I asked you like, hey, could me and my brothers work out with you for an hour? And we went through these different movements, and I remember we did an exercise where I was like laying on an incline, and I had these dumbbells on the side of me, and I had to like, with a straight arm, push them up using, I guess, like my armpits, which is kind of like an odd movement because you don't see that in the gym, right? Sure. But I remember I could do that particular movement with no problem, but my brother, who was extremely fit, couldn't do it.
Right.
And I was like, wait, what is going on here?
This is where you get into the problem of benchmarks with strength. I can take anyone, basically, and find a movement that they're not very strong at. And then basically the goal of when I train someone is I want to make that really hard. If you try to make up a movement that's really hard for me to do, I'd like to think you're going to have to go through several movements, because I think I've built this strength in so many rounded, different, full body ways through the water fitness, jiu-jitsu, rock climbing, all the things that I've done, that would be really hard. And so sometimes when I get people like your brother or brothers, there's an impact point. Like, I need them to know I have value for them. And so when I pick those exercises, I know that they're going to be bad at it, especially your youngest brother, because your older brother had spent more time in the weight room than your youngest brother. And so both of them, and also I helped it because I knew that you knew how to do those exercises. Like, I could have just as easily switched it and given exercises that they were good at that you weren't good at. But that's also based on my philosophy and how I train. They're training very traditional methods, very bench press, very squat, very curl, where we basically take off all of the constraints and make you figure it out with your body, which again is what my philosophy, I believe, is what real strength is and what a real, actual, healthy human being is.
Yeah, because I've mentioned this to you before too. I always find it funny when I go work out with them, because they live in California. So I go visit them, and we'll go to a traditional, like, big box gym.
Right.
And like in our gym, we don't have a barbell or like traditional.
We just don't use it.
Okay.
Very often.
Okay. I never use it.
Right.
I know it's technically there, but we never really use it. And so when I go there and I work out with them, I have no clue. Right. Like how much I can squat or bench or whatever. It's like, I know I can do stuff. So for me, it's always a fun discovery process of, okay, how much can I actually squat? And then you realize, holy crap, I can actually squat my body weight. Or
do this pretty well.
Even though I don't measure it every single week, because we're doing all this other stuff. So can you describe to the average listener here, like, what are we actually doing every single week?
We're just strengthening all the little curves and rotations. I mean, you hear me talk about this a lot, but humans are bipedal, rotational animals. We're the only ones that exist. So if everything is rotation, I'm going to need to train a lot unilaterally. So I would say, and this is a really popular word that I hate to use, but it's going to work to convey the point. We're bulletproofing all of your joints so that you can then go do these squats. Whereas a traditional bilateral strength training program, you're going to have deficits. And so if someone back squats a lot, let's say, you could get really good at squatting with your right hip. I don't ever want that to happen to myself or any of my clients. So I would say what we're actually doing is we're training for strength balance. I want everything to balance out. And that allows you to move in any other direction. And like you said, I mean, you really could have told me nothing better than, yeah, we don't really do back squat very much, but then in 5 minutes you had a barbell on your back and you were like, oh dang, like I can squat my body weight. And Bert's never really gone over with me deeply on how to like back squat. And that's a thing of beauty right there, because in one form of strength training, I've taught you how to squat and I've made you a really good squatter. I taught you nothing else, or I teach you everything else and then you go over and become a good squatter. And that's why I hate that word bulletproofing. But it's a good word for the question that you asked, because what we are actually doing is, and there's another way that some people say it, some of the military guys that are very popular right now, we're making tan harder to kill. We're putting armor on your body, because indeed that is what muscle is, so that you can sustain an injury, you can sustain a really heavy workout that is something that you've never done before. And you can walk away from that workout and be perfectly fine, because we've now gone through this process of making your joints, making your breath, making your legs, making you a better human so that now, and better and stronger human, so that now you can, whatever the constraints you want to put on Tan, no problem, man, he's got it. And so that's basically what I would say what we're doing.
So for the person that's listening to this, I know typically everyone, especially nowadays, is very busy.
Sure.
Right? And I like the fact that our workouts are only 30 minutes. And it blew my mind that you can get a really good workout in 30 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the time people think that you spend 45 minutes to an hour.
Sure.
Sometimes in the past before working out with you, I would skip a workout because I maybe had 40 minutes available. And I go, what can I actually do in 40 minutes? And I would skip a gym session then. So what would you tell a person what to do when it comes to working out in just 30 minutes?
I'll alter the answer a little bit, because if you're trying to set 30 minutes aside for your day, right? This works for us because this is an appointment that you and I meet at the same time every day. And then that's my job to come up with a excellent, concise 30-minute workout, like exercise selection with the right setups, the right constraints. That is literally what I do. That's my job.
Yeah, I just have to show up.
Getting a workout in 30 minutes, I think, is less the point than doing something that we've talked about, which is if you're just getting started into this strength world and you want to get stronger, put your workout in all day. Make it 30 minutes stretched throughout your day so that 5 minutes in between meetings, in between projects, do 5 minutes worth of bodyweight squats or lunges or push-ups or hang from a pull-up bar and tuck your knees up to your chest. And then do that for a total of 30 minutes throughout your day. Don't try to put one 30-minute session in there, because I can myself, if I sit down and I'm like, I'm going to do a 30-minute workout and I'm going to start busting it. 10 minutes in, dude, I don't want to do that workout anymore. Like, I'm really good at creating tension on my body, so I can wear myself out really fast. But throughout the day, for myself, seeing the clients that I see, 8, 12, 14 clients a day, I would say I probably work out 30 minutes in that day, because I do a couple of minutes here in between these two clients. I do a couple of minutes here in between these two clients. I do a couple of minutes here in between these two clients. And what that is something we've talked about, which is keeping the pump all day. So if you're trying to grow your arms, let's take push-ups for example. If someone in 30 minutes sits down and tries to do 4 sets of 10 on push-ups, 40 push-ups, they'd say they can do 5 comfortably, right? How are those other 4 sets going to be? Probably not that good. They're going to end up with some sore shoulders. Hands are going to be a little numb when you're typing. Might not be a good design. But if that person throughout the day comes off the computer and does 5 push-ups and then goes back and gets on that computer for another hour, and then an hour later he does 5 more push-ups, his shoulders feel fine. And he's really kept a shoulder pump all day without overusing muscles in that very short period of time. So I would say that's my first thing. And that you don't need especially starting out, man, that goes back to that bites you can chew. Because if you're not terribly experienced with working out, what in the heck are you going to do for an hour? When I have over a decade of experience riding workouts, and if you stuck me in the gym by myself for an hour and told me, Bert, you can't do any sort of like aerobic work. You can't go to the rower. You can't go run. You can't jump rope. You can't do anything like that. I'm going to be really bored within that hour, because I'm going to get tired and I'm not going to want to lift anymore. And I'm going to be like, okay, dude, I was here for about 30 minutes. Like, why do I have to stay here for an hour? And that's that whole physical culture, bang for your buck. That's I feel like what I know about the Productivity Podcast and about Asian efficiency, that's exactly what you talk about, man. Don't waste your time going through these processes and do unnecessary things. Work all day. You don't even have to set aside 30 minutes or an hour for your workout. Just put it in your day. And that's something I know you started doing too. You started picking up the mace and started picking up the clubs and started swinging them. And that made a massive difference on your shoulder. And that's really what probably took us over the top in being able to get you to that pull-up, is because you had that keep the pump all day thing. Keep your muscles working all day. When, in the end, we should be walking a whole lot more than we are, and we should be picking things up and tanning hides and doing all sorts of wild stuff that like hunter-gatherers and farmers did, that when there really just wasn't time to sit around and build your business like we have now. And so I would say that's the best thing. Just get that pump all day, keeping those little bites throughout the day. I think that's the best first step. I really do.
So one thing I'm always very interested in is not only being functional, like we've talked about, but also longevity. I want to be the type of person that when I'm 80, I still want to be able to get on a plane and walk around. If I have grandkids, like able to go play on the beach and run and do all this stuff. And I recently, when I came back from Mexico, I saw this woman who was a grandma from a friend of mine, and she went on their honeymoon trip. And she was like late 70s, was able to walk and everything. And I was like, wow, like I want to be like that woman.
Sure.
So what does it take for somebody like me or the everyday person to be able to walk, run, exercise, like actually be functional when we're 80?
Feet, you've heard me hammer it for so long. We have gone back to a little bit of that physical culture thing. We developed nice looking dress shoes and a heel that makes us look taller. And those nice looking dress shoes pinched our beautiful toes and made them into an arrow and gave us things like bunions and collapsed the arch. And then it also raised the heel, further putting pressure on those toes and making I think there's 33 bones and 26 joints or something like that in the foot. But that basically we completely disregarded that thing as if it was nothing, and we just stuck it in coffins and started working on people's knees and working on people's hips. Aside from everything that we've just said, which is the balance, the strength training, the benchmarks, holding on to that strength. Strength is massively important, and like the number one rule for longevity would probably be never ever stop lifting in some way. Be it your body weight stuff that we talked about, be it even if it's bench press, squat, the conventional big five, never stop lifting. That I would say is number one. But then a very close 1A, taking care of your feet, making sure your feet are healthy, making sure your feet are comfortable, making sure you can use all the nerves, moving your toes individually, which I can't but now you're getting into like my own goals. Like my goals right now in fitness, I'm probably as strong as I need to be for anything, but constantly, because I grew up playing sports in Texas where I just tightened my cleats down as hard as I possibly could, it ruined my feet, man. And having bad feet has led for me to, especially on the right side, have a bad ankle and then a bad knee injury doing a jiu-jitsu stuff. And I would say that is the number one, man, getting the right footwear, allowing your feet to work like a foot. I really think if you're talking 70s and 80s, because we're obviously going to lose muscle mass, and keep moving, that's another one, but you can't keep moving if you don't have feet. And the neuropathy, I mean, we could probably call it a pandemic because there's just tons, man. Like I mentioned earlier that most people come into me with a problem. One of the most common problems people come into me with is plantar fasciitis. And something people need to understand in that regard is plantar fasciitis leads to Morton's neuroma, which leads to neuropathy. And then none of the nerves in your feet work, and you have massive shooting pains in your feet all day. And this develops in people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, probably even younger. So yeah, that would be the number one, and I know we had meant to talk about that, so I would say feet is the longevity key.
Couple interesting things that come up for me when you said feet is, one is, as I've been working with you, I know you've mentioned it to me many times, and I was like, okay, this is just Bert preaching, and like I'm here to work out for 30 minutes, and I'm learning something, but I don't know about this feet thing, right? And I'm like, I like to think that I'm a pretty educated person,
Sure.
but I was even then fascinated by the idea of, wow, working on your feet is actually a thing. What the heck? But then there were a couple of things that happened over the years that kind of made me think, wow, okay, this is actually really important. One is I remember going to see Garrett at the NewFit office, and I saw one of his trainers, Steve, who has now passed away. But
R.I.P. Steve, man. He's a great dude.
Yeah. I remember asking him, like, hey, what do you see with clients, and what is like a muscle group that you think is the most underdeveloped? And he said, oh, it's by far the feet.
Yeah.
You should be able to curl your toes, grab the earth, something that almost nobody can do. And I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. And then for a while, I also did a Gosku, which is, and we had Rick on the podcast many years ago as well, which is the whole idea of like fixing your posture and making sure everything is aligned. And one of the things you also harped on was like making sure that your feet always point straight.
Right.
And as soon as he mentioned that, when I look at people's stance, I always notice that rarely does anybody have their feet pointing straight.
Right.
Like it's always like a little bit, few degrees out, or when this pains me is when I go on a trail here that I go on a few times a week. When people are running, their feet are pointing out, and they're running when the feet are pointing out, or they're running on their tiptoes. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here.
Sure.
But what really pushed me over the edge was maybe like last year, I would say, is we did a foot bath. Okay, so for those who don't know what a foot bath is, and we have to talk about NewFit a little bit too, but a foot bath is basically this idea of we're using this device called the NewFit machine, which we've talked about a little bit, but it's basically like an electrical device that sends signals to your body to contract muscles or relax. And so it's basically sending electricity through your body, but I'll let you explain in a little bit more detail later. And so I'm putting my feet in this bucket, and it has water in it, and we're running electricity through the water. So it's safe. You're not going to die or anything. And my feet are like cramping like crazy. And I go, what are we doing, Bert? Like, why are we cramping my feet? And then that's all we did for 3 minutes or something. And then we did all of our exercises on the ARX machine, which I'm sure you can explain better than I can. But it's basically a fitness machine. And I remember breaking all of my PRs that day. Right. And I was like, what? Like, I just did a foot bath. I cramped my feet, and I broke all my PRs, including deadlifts, a pull down, a row. Yep. I was like, what do these things have to do with my feet? Like, I don't get it.
Right.
Please explain.
Garrett has a good phrase where he says the feet are megaphones. And if you lose 1 degree of motion here or there in a big toe, that 1 degree of movement inside, outside, curling, extension, any of the above is going to amplify at your ankle and be 2 to 3 degrees. And then you go up to your knee and it amplifies more. And that's 6, 7 degrees. Then you go up to your hip and you've now lost 10, 20 degrees of range of motion because you lost that 1 degree of range of motion at your hips. There's a model that's very famous, and I don't know the name of it, forgive me, but it is a man standing there and his feet are massively huge. His hands are massively huge. His nose is massively huge, and his tongue is massively huge. These are the places where we have the most nerves in our bodies. And the nerves, specifically in our feet, send signals all the way up, and they actually begin this. Humans are rotational, as I had mentioned, and at the foot level, it starts with a pronation and a supination motion. A pronation motion is when the arch of your foot collapses. A supination motion is when the arch of your foot gets higher. These coincide with forward and down. Think of your knee bending into flexion. So the more my arch can collapse when I push my knee forward, the further it will then extend backwards. Think of basketball players. We talk about squats, and we squat, quote unquote, people say, with their knees outside. Get your knees outside. And then you look at a basketball player jump, and when he jumps, or she, their knees go forward and to the inside. in what seems like, oh man, don't do that, you're going to explode your knee. But what they're actually doing is accessing the pronation of the foot. Pronation equals power and equals balance. When we were walking barefooted, you would have been walking in dirt or grass, and you would have your feet straight ahead, like you said. And when you're walking, you would come down and your heel would hit first, and then you would wrap your toes down to the ground very slowly in like a cascading method. And if your foot then felt a rock or a snake or a spider or something, you could then pause and adjust the strike of your foot. People these days can't do that. That's what our foot is designed to do. Our foot is designed to read the world that's underneath us. Does anybody think that hunter-gatherers, indigenous populations, when they ran to chase prey, do you think they were looking at the ground? Probably not. That's probably not going to make you a very effective tracker unless you were looking at the tracks of the animal on the ground. They're certainly not paying attention to, oh my gosh, what's in front of me? I don't want to step on a rock. And that is what we would do if we had someone run in the grass barefoot. So your feet touch the world, they greet the world, you use them in the muscles in your feet more than any other muscle in your body. You have to, if you're going to walk upright and be a bipedal human, you have to walk on your feet. And it's also, if we're just going pure orthopedics, as far as I know, doctors cannot build you a new functioning foot. Doctors can build you a functioning knee, a functioning hip, a functioning shoulder. We can put those things into your body and replace a destroyed joint. If your foot gets absolutely crushed by something, Tiger Woods is a decent example. Tiger Woods, he played golf for a few months after he came back with that foot. Like, when you crush a foot, it is the most devastating injury that you can have outside of something that would kill you, and you can't recover from it. So therein goes to that whole foot pronation, supination thing. We can go as far down that wormhole as you want, because what that does start is a helical motion. So if you're picturing a foot, your big toe's on the inside of the foot, your heel, for the sake of this conversation, let's call it the outside of your foot. There is an arc that comes from your foot to from your big toe to your heel, and you strike with that heel, and then you put the big toe down, and then you push off the big toe. That initiates a rotational motion in the lower leg bones and the upper leg bones that facilitate walking, facilitate gait, facilitate this rotation that is necessary for the longevity of being a safe, balanced, walking human. If you look at our older populations, you'll notice they kind of sway from one foot to the other. That's what you want to avoid. And so what you experienced is I used that foot bath to turn on every single nerve in your foot and every single muscle in your lower leg, so that then every single exercise that we did after that, your body read it as Tan is rooted to the ground. He is not going to lose his balance. I know exactly where his feet are, so that now I can push, pull, deadlift with my arms, with my hips. We can let those guys go. We don't have to worry about Tan falling over, because when something holds back, usually you see people will go to their toes, and when they go to their toes, they don't have that heel down, they don't have that posterior chain anchoring you in place. We did the footwork, and that's why I focus on the footwork, because when the person is anchored to the ground, we have all these grounding, calming effects that are just beneficial as well, and a whole nother realm of wellness that isn't even strength and conditioning necessarily, but it's also the most important part of strength and conditioning. If you got bad feet, your strength conditioning, your powerlifting or bodybuilding or athletic career is not going to last very long.
One thing I've noticed when sometimes like new clients come in, like an often pain point that people have is knee pain, right? And one thing I've kind of discovered from just working on my own body and health and wellness is oftentimes wherever you have pain is actually not the source.
Right.
It's actually somewhere else. If you have low back pain, which is a common pain,
Right.
it's actually not in your low back. It's oftentimes your glutes or even your core or hamstrings, right? And I remember this client coming in and he had knee pain, but the first thing you did with the new fit device was working on his ankles.
Right. Right.
Explain that process.
So I should say at some point in this, just as a quick refresher on the new fit device, what the new fit device is, it is a direct current electrical stimulation machine. And by direct current, it means the person's brain that I'm using it on, their brain will adopt the activation of whatever muscle I tell it to. So you put the new fit pad on, let's say calf and ankle for this purpose. Your calf would cramp. If you moved your foot or your ankle during that cramp in 30 seconds, maybe a minute, that cramp would subside and you would then be able to move that foot. Now, going back to what I said a second ago about the foot, if someone has knee pain, their body is reading that every time that knee goes forward, nothing is going to stop that knee from going down and hitting the ground, much like your shoulder in the hip hop dancing. Nothing was holding that shoulder onto your body. In this case, the body isn't reading that in general knee pain, and we'll refer to this as like the top front of your knee pain, often referred to as patellofemoral knee pain. And when that is the case, I know that person's big toe is not registering to take the pressure when that knee comes forward. And so oftentimes, if I make a big toe stronger on a painful knee, or I turn on the nerves that control the toes, specifically the big toe, that knee pain and that signal coming from that knee that says, ooh, Tan, don't do that, our kneecap might pop off. That signal stops. And that, I think, is something you're talking about with that pain thing. Pain's a signal. Pain is not an indication of something always being wrong. Pain is your body saying, I don't know how to do whatever you're asking me to do, and if you keep asking me, we're going to have an issue. And that's basically what pain is. And that's probably one of the hardest things to get across to people is your back pain could be a knee, could be a foot, could be a hip, could be even a shoulder. But your body, and going back to something I said earlier about that tension and being able to move that tension and put it in whatever direction I want to put that tension, what's usually happened is that person is holding tension in one area. And that one area, take the right hip, for example, they never shift all the way over to their left hip. They just walk on their right hip all the time, which would result in what you're talking about walking around the trail. If a person stands on their right foot all the time, their right foot is going to duck out to the side, because what that foot wants to do and what that leg wants to do is propel you forward when you're walking. So if it ducks out to the side and isn't using the big toe, that makes pronation more easily reached by that foot, because I can turn my foot out and press through the arch of my foot. But the downside of that is now I've completely stopped using my big toe. And this stops the helical motion of the bones in the leg, which is the way the leg muscles were designed. If you look at a model of the human body and you strip the skin away and you have all the muscles are oriented in these weird angular ways, like they're not set up in the straight up and down pattern at all. They're very crisscrossed, and there's all sorts of angles. And then that's the importance of it all.
So if I had to guide a listener here, so we can actually do this while we're recording this. So for example, if I stand right now
Okay.
and my feet are straight, that seems okay.
Sure.
That's ideally what we want, right?
Right.
And ideally, we want to feel like we're balanced both on our toes and on our heel. So what happens when you look at your feet like this? So both my left and right foot are pointed outwards.
Sure.
For some people, it might be a bigger degree. Like that. So when you see this, when people point out both feet, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me, if you just look at your feet right now, when you turned your feet out, your arches came down to the floor. Mm-hmm. And when those arches come down to the floor, I now know Tan can access the inside of his foot, the inside chain of muscles, but he can't access the outside chain of muscles because that would require full knee extension. And as long as your foot is turned outwards, you'll never be able to fully extend your knee. And what will result is that you would have pain on the inside of your knee oftentimes because your knee never extends. And so you never get that force into the back of your knee. And the actual nerve that you would not be using by turning your feet out is called the peroneal nerve. And I would say it's one of the most underused nerves in the body because of what you see.
So if you see somebody running, pointing out like this, what do you think is going to happen? Or I'm sure you've seen it happen.
There's just going to be no economy of motion. That person, if you run, and this is something I think people run into often, if you work out your legs or you run a lot, you should have a big butt. Butts propel these things. If the person runs with their feet out, you'll notice that person has no ass. None. It's just flat. And it's not very strong at all. And that's often the case because glutes, feet, you hear all this conversation about glutes. And you got to access your glutes to stand upright. You got to access your glutes to run. And the glutes and the feet actually have more connective points than any other part to the body. The more straight your feet are, the more you're rotating that femur and tibia, the more access to your glutes you're going to have. The more glutes you have, the stronger of a human that you will be, the better you will be at walking, running, etc.
So one of the things I like working with you is, and this is something I apply to all the people that I work with and people that I hire and people that I even contract and such, is when I work with somebody, I want to work with somebody who is always learning and growing and is always staying on top of things. For example, I have a designer who lives in Taiwan. He's actually Swiss, but he married a Taiwanese woman. And he's always on top of design. Like he knows the design trends. He knows what colors are in, like what themes and aesthetics are in. And I like working with him because he's always on top of things. And one of the reasons I appreciate working with you is you're always learning and growing about health, fitness, and like...
Sure.
How do you stay on top of stuff? Like, how do you learn? Who are some of your influences?
First, I would say I stay on top of it. I just never quit learning. I take the lifestyle, I really believe in having a lifetime of learning. That's a major thing in my life. When you come in for your session, back to the straight ahead feet thing, I might tell you about short-nosed bears and that they have feet that are straight ahead as opposed to other bears which have feet that are internally rotated. So the first part of that is I just love learning, period. But then secondarily, because fitness is my business, I take it as my responsibility. And I don't ever want to have someone like you come to me and say, hey man, do you want to do a podcast next week? I don't want to have to do research for that podcast. Like, I'm not good at sitting down for 2 hours and white knuckling through some research because you gave me a list of questions. I want to make sure that I'm on the cutting edge of these topics and that I'm always able to answer anyone's questions when they walk into my gym, because I have no idea what people are going to ask me when they come in. I have no idea why people are coming in. And if they come in and bring me some new product. Bert, have you heard of Onnit Alpha Brain Black Label? Yeah. What is it? It's got a little more of this than the original Alpha Brain. Like, I take it as my responsibility to know those answers. And if I worked in cabinets or flooring or electricity, I would like to think I would view it the same way and that I would study it just as hard. But I would be lying to you if I said that fitness wasn't my passion and I'm not pursuing it on my own all the time too. Well, that's do what you love and you never work another day in your life, is that I just have a voracious appetite for the subject. People to follow, I think one of the biggest influences on my career is a guy named Dr. Pat Davidson that lives in New York City. He's a little rough around the edges as far as presentation's concerned, but I tend to like that sort of thing. And he's got an ebook, and it's called Rethinking the Big Patterns. And he has what I think is the most unique approach in sports right now, and he's taking it much more from a sport perspective. NBA teams, NFL teams, Major League Baseball teams that are all meeting with him, learning from him on how to guide their sessions. Another one that I would follow and that I get so much from is NewFit itself. NewFit itself, with the direct current e-stim, is getting into bigger arenas. I think Odell Beckham has one. We'll see if he comes back after hurting his knee again. He should have come to see me. But NewFit's another one that I follow. I think two other ones. One is a man named Alex Viada. Alex Viada runs a company called Complete Human Performance. And what he does is he tries to take a marathon triathlete and teach them how to lift weights. Or take a bodybuilder and a power lifter and teach them how to run marathons or triathlons. The triathlete, the marathon, is never going to be a great weightlifter. And the weightlifter is never going to be a great triathlete or marathoner because their bodies are skewed towards performance in those two things. But he does believe in creating that balance where don't get too specialized. And speaking of specialization, the last one that is probably the most kind of like a philosopher, I would say, is Ido Portal. I love Ido. I love the way he phrases things. I love the way he never answers questions. I would go Andrew Huberman as well. Ido was on the Andrew Huberman podcast, which is a great episode because you get a neurologist from Stanford interviewing an Israeli man who answers the first question with, "I'm going to try and not answer your questions today, but provide some thoughts. Play with some ideas." They're both so polar opposite that you can see the neurologist change his questions every time. But yeah, no, Pat Davidson, Ido Portal, Andrew Huberman. And then if you are in the strength sports world for any reason, Cal Dietz is another one too. And these are guys that just have moved beyond the traditional ideas of weightlifting. They're creating platforms for themselves. They're opening minds in this world. And I really stick to those guys a lot.
So what I'm curious about then is, what are you doing now to keep up with your health, wellness, fitness? I know you're doing something with swimming and stuff, but we go even deeper. Is there a particular diet you follow? Do you have a routine? Do you use a NewFit for certain things? Let's get really deep and geeky here.
Twofold. One, trying to iron out injuries and deficiencies and balance in myself from rock climbing, jiu-jitsu. These things create imbalances, injuries, etc. But for a much bigger picture, you mentioned the swimming thing, and that's a shout out Deep End Fitness, Austin, Texas version and national version. Deep End Fitness was created by some special forces guys who were water safety instructors. And the whole idea is, think about picking up 100 pounds of weights, jumping down to the bottom of a 13-foot pool, and then carrying those weights across the bottom of the 13-foot pool. When we talk about this idea of fitness and going back to that whole pronation, supination, inside-outside thing, and that helical motion, that's a representation for how humans move through the world, right? So if you're a properly rotating, properly calm breathing human, you're moving well, you're kicking ass, you're strong. I feel like I'm there. So then the next challenge is, how much stress can I put on you and have you stay calm and stay in that same rotation, helical, slow, controlled inhalation, exhalation within these right movements and not panic. And that is what the Deep End Fitness is based on. And that is what I am personally working on right now. Like, I love challenging myself with things like really difficult swimming because I'm not very good at it. And therefore, it inherently makes me uncomfortable. And so when I'm driving to these classes, like, I'm nervous as hell, man. And I have to talk myself down. And when I have to talk myself down through something and then go do it, like, through the fear, man, that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to find ways to raise the stress level around me, because I do believe, and I had a decent idea that maybe it'll surface one day, but that I would have a book that would be called Taming Tension, meaning tension and stress are not bad things if I control how they affect me. The more stress I can endure and not get that tension too high, which you've been white knuckling through a project, right? Like, you got a review or something like that, or back and go to college. You got to study for a test, and you're just like, oh my God, I'm going to read this book, and you're just clenching your fists, and you're working so hard. Like, how much better would that studying be if you just paused, took a breath, really controlled yourself, one paragraph at a time? Okay, let me review that. It's the same thing with fitness. The more calm you can stay under more stressful situations, now you're a seriously high-performing human being. And so that raising the stress level in manageable ways and trying to control my breath is something I'm really working on, and something that which always shows that fitness has spectrums, something that you're way better at than me. Cold tubs. I hate them. I'm such a baby. I totally understand the value, but like, I get in there and I'm just, and it's just awful, and I can't catch my breath. And this is why I'm doing the swimming thing. Like, sure, I could do more cold tubbing, but me being the person I am, the motion of that and trying to control, and it's really made me a lot better. And now I'm taking cold showers in the morning. That's the aspect I'm working on of it.
Bert, this has been awesome. There's so much to go through and unpack, and for people to research and implement. And if people want to follow you, get your stuff, work with you, like, where should people go?
At MasseyBV on Instagram. We'll post a little more. I would say that I post terribly often, but if I post, you'll get it there. There won't be posts that you're missing by me if you follow the Instagram. I think the adapt.fitness is our website. If you're in Austin, of course, you can email me, Bert at adapt.fitness. Reach out. Everybody gets a free hour. We bring you in, show you what we do. Sometimes I refer to it as the person drinks from a fire hose while you're there for your first session. But if you've had the podcast, it'll be a really good head start. If you're interested in NewFit, I would say also email me. I do contract work with NewFit, and I do have an actual athletic development course that if someone purchased a NewFit, you could also purchase my course and learn from me directly there. I want to say it's 8 hours worth of stuff, but I might be a little short on that. But it's a lot of content. But yeah, I would say all of those ways, most important being www.adapt.fitness and at MasseyBV on Instagram. And it is, I hope I tried to make things palatable. Like I said, the biggest thing in this is just take little bites, man. Understand what you can do. And once you get in the wormhole of these fitness searches, it's cool sometimes, good and bad, how algorithms for social medias work, because I feel like I'm so tied into the fitness world that somewhere, someone anywhere could post something cool in fitness, and the algorithm from Instagram would be like, oh, Bert wants to see this, and it would show it to me. So it's just endless, the amount of people that are out there actually sharing good information if you're willing to open up your mind. Diet stuff, because you asked me and because I'm super passionate about this, please stay away from trends. If you eat 3 meals a day that look like a protein, a carbohydrate, and a vegetable, you're probably doing really good. And if you like meat and steak and blueberries and honey, by all means, go with that diet. But know that it's not, some secret message. The diet world, I would never go be a nutritionist. It seems like a bunch of people in a tiny room just yelling at each other.
On that note, we'll make sure to add everything here in the show notes. Bert, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Tan. It's a real pleasure. Anytime, man.